I pretended to be broke for 5 years. You won't believe my gold digger husband's reaction. If you're just tuning in, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update on this story. And don't forget to let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The smell of burnt coffee filled the cramped studio apartment as Arya stared at the eviction notice taped to her door. At least that's what Edmund believed when he knocked 3 times, his usual pattern. She quickly shoved the designer handbag under the threadbare couch and smoothed down her thrift store dress. "Baby, you okay?" "I heard shouting," Edmund said, his deep voice carrying genuine concern that made her stomach twist with guilt. "Just the neighbors again," she lied, opening the door to reveal her boyfriend of 6 months. His eyes immediately scanned the sparse room. The broken television, the single mattress on the floor, the empty refrigerator humming loudly in the corner. What Edmund didn't know was that Arya Merton owned 3 luxury apartments across the city, a portfolio worth millions, and a trust fund that could buy his entire neighborhood. The eviction notice was fake, printed on her home office's premium printer. The shabby apartment was a carefully constructed stage. "I brought groceries," Edmund said, lifting plastic bags filled with generic brands. His paycheck from the warehouse barely covered his own rent, yet here he was, spending his last dollars on her. Arya's heart clenched watching him stock her deliberately empty cabinets. For 6 months she'd been testing him, waiting for the moment he'd ask about her family's wealth, probe about her background, or show interest in anything beyond her supposedly struggling self. Instead, Edmund had shown up every evening after his 12-hour shifts, bringing food, paying her fake bills, and holding her during manufactured breakdowns about financial stress. "Thank you," she whispered, studying his face for any sign of ulterior motive. But Edmund just smiled, exhausted but genuine, and pulled her close. "We'll figure this out together, Arya. I promise." The first crack appeared in her elaborate plan that night, not in his character but in her own resolve. 3 years had passed since Arya began her deception, and the weight of her lies had become as familiar as breathing. She sat in her real penthouse, staring at the engagement ring Edmund had saved 8 months to buy. A modest diamond that probably cost him more than most people's cars. "Miss Merton, your mother called again about the charity gala," her assistant Rebecca announced through the intercom. Arya quickly switched it off. Edmund was arriving soon at her fake apartment, and she couldn't risk him overhearing anything about her real life. The charity gala where she was being honored for donating $2 million to local schools. Money Edmund would never dream she possessed. 20 minutes later she was back in character, wearing a waitress uniform stained with ketchup, sitting in the cramped studio that had become her second home. Edmund entered, his face glowing with an excitement she'd never seen before. "Arya, baby, sit down." Her pulse quickened. After 3 years of watching him work double shifts to support what he believed was their shared poverty, she'd seen nothing but pure devotion. He'd never asked about her family, never questioned why she had no social media presence, never pushed when she claimed she couldn't afford a phone upgrade. "I know things have been tough," Edmund began, his hands shaking slightly. "I know we've been struggling and I can't give you everything you deserve yet." Arya's throat tightened. Through her performance, she'd watched this man sacrifice everything. His social life, his hobbies, even his relationship with friends who thought he was crazy for supporting a broke girlfriend. "But I love you, Arya Merton. I love how you never complain, how you smile even when we're eating ramen for the 5th night straight." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring box with trembling fingers. "Will you marry me?" The diamond was tiny, but it represented months of his life, hundreds of hours of overtime, countless sacrifices she'd witnessed without him knowing. She could end their financial struggles with a single phone call. "Yes," she whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. The wedding planning process became Arya's most elaborate performance yet. While Edmund scoured discount stores for decorations, she secretly coordinated with her wedding planner, Elise Brown, to create 2 entirely different events. "The budget ceremony needs to look authentic," Arya explained during a clandestine meeting at Maya's upscale office. 30 guests maximum, community center venue, grocery store flowers. Maya's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "And the real reception? 500 guests, the Riverside Hotel, full orchestra." Arya signed the check for $50,000 without blinking. Edmund can never know. The dual planning consumed her days. She'd meet Edmund at the community center, nodding sadly when he explained they couldn't afford the premium lighting package. Then she'd drive across town to approve ice sculptures and champagne fountains for the reception he'd never see. Her family grew increasingly concerned about her charade. During Sunday dinner at her childhood mansion, her sister Mabel confronted her directly. "You're playing with fire, Arya. What happens when he finds out you've been lying for 3 years?" "He won't find out," Arya insisted, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon. "Besides, I needed to know he loved me for me, not my bank account." "But he's planning a life based on lies," her father, Judge Harold Merton, interjected. "That boy is working himself to death trying to provide for you." Arya's mother, Patricia, a prominent surgeon, set down her wine glass with unusual force. "Honey, I've seen Edmund at your fake apartment. He looks exhausted. This isn't love anymore, it's cruelty." The words stung because they held truth Arya had been avoiding. She'd watched Edmund lose weight from stress, seen him fall asleep standing up after 18-hour workdays, witnessed him declining his friends' invitations because he couldn't afford social activities. "I'm protecting what we have," Arya argued weakly. "You're destroying it," Mabel replied. "And when the truth comes out, and it will, you'll lose him forever." That night, Arya stood in her real bedroom, staring at 2 wedding dresses. The simple one Edmund had admired at the discount bridal shop, and the custom Vera Wang gown hanging in her walk-in closet. Edmund's bachelor party was supposed to be a quiet affair, beer and pizza at his best friend Nicholas's apartment. What Arya didn't anticipate was Nicholas's girlfriend, Shanice, working as a server at the exclusive restaurant where the Merton family held their monthly business meetings. "I swear I saw Arya there last week," Shanice told Nicholas as they cleaned up after the modest celebration. "She was sitting with some rich-looking people signing papers." Nicholas laughed it off. "Arya? Man, that girl can barely afford groceries. You must have seen someone who looked like her." But Shanice was persistent. "I'm telling you, it was her. She was wearing a designer dress, had her hair done professionally. The whole table was drinking wine that costs more than Edmund makes in a week." Edmund, overhearing from the kitchen, felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What restaurant?" "Le Bernardin. You know, that fancy place downtown where celebrities eat." The name hit Edmund like a physical blow. He'd walked past that restaurant once, seen the prices posted outside. A single appetizer cost more than he spent on groceries in a month. "There's no way," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Shanice pulled out her phone. "I took a picture because I thought it was weird. Look." The photo was blurry, taken from across the restaurant, but Edmund could clearly see Arya's profile. She was laughing, completely relaxed, wearing a dress he'd never seen before. A dress that obviously cost more than his monthly salary. Maybe she was serving tables? Nicholas suggested, trying to help his friend process the impossible image. In a dress like that, at a table with a bunch of suits. Shanice shook her head. "Edmund, I think your girl's been lying to you." Edmund stared at the photo until his eyes burned. 3 years of memories crashed together. Arya's reluctance to talk about her family, her mysterious absences during the day, the way she sometimes seemed too polished for someone supposedly struggling financially. "I need to go," he said quietly. "Edmund, wait," Nicholas started. But Edmund was already grabbing his jacket, his mind racing with questions he'd been too in love to ask. As he drove toward Arya's apartment, one thought echoed repeatedly. If she could lie about this, what else had been false? Edmund sat in his car outside Arya's apartment building for 2 hours, the blurry photo burning in his phone screen. Every logical explanation crumbled under scrutiny. The woman in that restaurant wasn't someone who looked like Arya. It was Arya, confident and radiant in a way he'd never seen her. When she finally appeared, walking up the street with groceries from the discount market, Edmund felt his world tilt. She moved differently when she thought no one was watching. Straighter posture, quicker stride, like someone comfortable with power. "Hey baby," Arya called out, her voice taking on that slightly defeated tone she always used around the apartment. "How was the bachelor party?" "Good," Edmund lied, studying her face for tells he'd been too blind to see before. Nicholas's girlfriend said something interesting. Arya's hand paused on her keys. "Oh. She thought she saw you at some fancy restaurant downtown. Le Bernardin." He watched her carefully. "Crazy, right?" For just a moment, Less than a second, Aria's mask slipped. Her eyes widened slightly, her breathing changed, and Edmund saw something he'd never seen before: fear. "That's ridiculous," she laughed, but it sounded forced. "When would I ever go somewhere like that?" "That's what I said." Edmund stepped closer. "But she showed me a picture, Aria. And it really looked like you." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Aria's mind raced through explanations, excuses, anything to maintain the illusion she'd built so carefully. "Edmund, you know me. I'm barely keeping this place." She gestured around the shabby apartment. "How could I afford?" "Show me your ID," Edmund interrupted. "What?" "Your ID." Nicholas said the woman looked exactly like you, wore expensive clothes, seemed comfortable around money. His voice grew harder. "If it wasn't you, proving it should be easy." Aria's heart hammered against her ribs. Her driver's license listed her real address, the penthouse Edmund had never seen. Every credit card in her wallet bore the name of someone who could buy and sell this entire neighborhood. "I don't have to prove anything to you," she said, deflecting with wounded pride. "Actually," Edmund said quietly, "you do. Because I've been killing myself for 3 years trying to support us. And if you've been lying about who you are, then everything we have is built on deception." The weight of his words settled between them like a living thing. The wedding was 12 days away when Edmund hired a private investigator. He'd spent his entire savings account, the money meant for their honeymoon, on 3 days of professional surveillance. The photos arrived via email while he sat in his work truck during lunch break. His hands shook as he opened each image. Aria entering a luxury high-rise, Aria driving a BMW he'd never seen, Aria having lunch with people in $1,000 suits. But the final photo shattered everything. Aria emerging from a penthouse elevator, talking animatedly on a phone, wearing an outfit that cost more than he made in 6 months. The timestamp showed yesterday 2:30 p.m., exactly when she texted him about being stuck at her job interview at a nonprofit. The investigator's report was thorough and devastating. Aria Merton, daughter of Judge Harold Merton and Dr. Patricia Merton. Trust fund beneficiary. Property owner. Net worth: approximately $8 million. Edmund read the words 3 times before they registered. $8 million. While he'd been working 18-hour days, skipping meals to pay her fake rent, selling his car to buy her engagement ring, she'd been worth more money than he could conceptualize. The nonprofit job? She owned 40% of it. The eviction notices? Printed on premium paper stock. The broken appliances in her apartment? All functional items staged to look damaged. His phone buzzed. A text from Aria. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Made your favorite dinner with the groceries you bought yesterday. Love you." Edmund stared at the message until the words blurred. She was still performing, still pretending, still letting him sacrifice for a woman who could buy his entire life with pocket change. That evening, he drove to her real address. The building's doorman greeted him with confusion. "I'm here to see Aria Merton," Edmund said. "Of course, sir. Shall I call up to the penthouse?" Penthouse. The word hit him like a physical blow. "That won't be necessary," Edmund said quietly. "I think I've seen enough." As he walked away, Edmund felt something die inside his chest. Not just love, but his ability to trust his own judgment. If Aria could lie this completely, this convincingly for 3 years, what else about his life was an illusion? Edmund didn't go to Aria's fake apartment that night. Instead, he sat in his own small place, staring at the engagement ring receipt that represented 4 months of overtime pay. The ring he'd bought for a millionaire who let him believe she needed his financial support. The next morning, he called in sick to work, the first time in 3 years, and drove to her penthouse. The doorman, clearly recognizing him from security footage, looked uncomfortable. "Miss Merton isn't expecting anyone," the man said carefully. "She's expecting me," Edmund replied. "She just doesn't know it yet." When Aria opened her penthouse door, wearing silk pajamas that cost more than his monthly rent, the elaborate fiction between them finally crumbled. "Edmund," she breathed, and for the first time in their relationship, he heard her real voice, not the slightly defeated tone of her performance, but the confident cadence of someone who'd never wanted for anything. "Aria." He looked past her into the sprawling apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and artwork that belonged in museums. "Or should I say Miss Merton? Trust fund heiress, property mogul, charitable foundation owner. She closed her eyes. How long have you known? 3 days. Long enough to realize I never knew you at all. Edmund pulled out his phone, showing her the surveillance photos. Long enough to understand that while I was working myself to death trying to support us, you were living like this. Aria's carefully constructed world collapsed around her. The man she'd fallen in love with, really genuinely fallen for during their charade, was looking at her with something worse than anger. Betrayal. Disgust. I can explain, she started. Explain what? How you watched me sell my car to buy your engagement ring. How you let me work 18-hour days while you owned 3 apartments. Edmund's voice rose. How you let me skip meals to pay your fake bills while you had $8 million in the bank. I needed to know you loved me for me, not my money, Aria said desperately. But who are you? Edmund demanded. Because I've never met the real you. Everything I loved was a performance. The accusation hung between them like a blade, cutting through 3 years of carefully constructed intimacy. Within hours of Edmund discovering the truth, both families were in crisis mode. Aria's parents arrived at her penthouse to find her sobbing on the Italian leather couch that Edmund now knew existed. We warned you this would happen, Patricia said, though her voice carried more sadness than anger. That young man loved you completely, and you turned his devotion into a game. Meanwhile, Edmund sat in Nicholas's living room, his best friend's girlfriend Shanice trying to process what she'd inadvertently uncovered. $8 million? Nicholas kept repeating. Man, she watched you eat ramen for dinner while sitting on $8 million? Shanice was less diplomatic. That's not just lying, Edmund. That's psychological torture. She watched you sacrifice everything while she played dress-up in poverty. But it was Edmund's older sister, Lucinda, who cut to the heart of his pain. The worst part isn't the money, is it? It's that you have no idea who she really is. Edmund nodded miserably. I thought I knew her better than anyone. Turns out I didn't know her at all. Back at the Merton mansion, Judge Harold was having his own reckoning with his daughter's choices. You didn't just lie about money, Arya. You manipulated someone's entire life. You watched him destroy his health working to support a fiction. I was protecting our relationship, Arya insisted. From what? From him having choices? From him knowing who he was really marrying? Patricia's surgical precision extended to emotional wounds. You stole 3 years of that man's authentic life. Mabel, ever the lawyer, posed the question that terrified Arya most. Do you even know if you love him or if you just love how he loved your fake version? The question echoed in the silence because Arya realized she didn't have an answer. She'd been performing for so long, she'd lost track of her authentic feelings beneath the elaborate deception. The wedding is in 9 days, Harold said quietly. What are you going to do? Arya stared out the window at the city below, knowing that whatever choice she made would define not just her future, but the kind of person she wanted to be. The day before the wedding, Edmund made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He was going to attend the ceremony, not as the groom but as someone seeking closure. You sure about this? Nicholas asked as they stood outside the community center where the fake wedding was supposed to take place. I need to see how far she was willing to take it, Edmund replied. I need to know if she would have gone through with marrying me while living a complete lie. What Edmund didn't expect was to find the community center completely empty except for a janitor who seemed confused by their presence. Wedding? There's no wedding scheduled here today, the man said, checking his clipboard. Hasn't been a booking for weeks. Edmund felt the ground shift beneath him again. Even the wedding venue had been a lie. Meanwhile, across town at the Riverside Hotel, Arya stood in her real wedding dress, the custom Vera Wang gown worth more than Edmund's annual salary, surrounded by 500 guests who knew nothing about the groom's existence. Where's the happy couple? Asked her cousin Miles, a prominent attorney who'd flown in from the West Coast. Arya's mother exchanged glances with her father. They'd agreed to let Arya handle the situation in her own way, but watching their daughter fall apart in real time was agonizing. The groom had to handle some business, Arya said weakly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. But Maya, the wedding planner, was dealing with a more immediate crisis. Arya, we have a problem. Someone named Edmund is at the front desk asking about the Merton Johnson wedding. He says he's the groom. The color drained from Arya's face. Somehow, Edmund had discovered the Rayal wedding. He was here at her elaborate reception, surrounded by the wealth and privilege she'd hidden from him for 3 years. "What do you want me to tell security?" Maya asked. Arya looked around at the ice sculptures, the orchestra, the caviar station that cost more than most people's rent. Everything Edmund had never been allowed to see, all the luxury she'd enjoyed while watching him sacrifice for their fake poverty. "Tell them," she said quietly, "to let him in." Because she finally understood that the real confrontation, the one that would determine everything, was about to begin. Edmund walked into the Riverside Hotel ballroom and felt like he'd entered another dimension. Crystal chandeliers, gold leaf details, flowers that must have cost thousands of dollars. 500 guests in designer clothing, sipping champagne that probably cost more per bottle than he made in a week. And there, in the center of it all, stood Arya in a wedding dress that belonged in a fairy tale, talking to people who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. "Edmund," she said when she saw him, and her voice carried a tremor he'd never heard before. The entire ballroom seemed to quiet, sensing drama. 500 pairs of eyes turned toward the man in the off-the-rack suit who clearly didn't belong in this gilded world. "So this is who you really are," Edmund said, his voice carrying across the marble floors. "This is the life you were living while I was working 18-hour days to pay your fake rent." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Arya's parents moved closer, but she held up a hand to stop them. "Edmund, please. Let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you had 500 people at your real wedding while I thought we were getting married at a community center with 30 guests. His voice grew stronger, fueled by a pain so deep it had transformed into something else entirely. "How you watched me sell my car to buy your engagement ring while you owned a BMW I never knew existed?" The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Judge Harold Merton watched his daughter's world collapse in public, while Dr. Patricia Merton felt her heart break for both young people caught in this devastating moment. "I wanted to know if you loved me for who I really was," Arya said desperately, tears flowing down her carefully made-up face. "But I never met who you really are." Edmund's voice cracked. "I fell in love with a performance. A woman who doesn't exist." He looked around the ballroom at the luxury that surrounded them, at the life she'd been living while he scraped together every dollar to support their supposed shared struggle. "The saddest part," Edmund said quietly, "is that if you had trusted me with the truth, I would have loved you anyway. Not for your money, but despite it." The words hit Arya like a physical blow because she realized too late that they were probably true. The confrontation in the ballroom became the moment both Edmund and Arya understood there was no path back to what they'd had, or thought they'd had. "I need you to understand something," Edmund said, his voice steady despite the pain radiating from every word. "For 3 years I planned my entire life around supporting you. I turned down job opportunities that required travel because I thought you needed me here. I didn't pursue friendships because I was working extra shifts to pay your bills." The guests watched in stunned silence as this private devastation played out before them. "I gave up dreams," Edmund continued, "because I thought we were building something together. Something real." Arya's sister Mabel moved to comfort her, but Arya stepped away. She needed to hear this, needed to understand the full scope of what her deception had cost. "But none of it was real," Edmund said. "While I was sacrificing everything for our future, you were living in luxury and lying about every single aspect of your life." Judge Merton finally stepped forward. "Son, perhaps we could discuss this privately." "No," Edmund said firmly. "She made this public when she invited 500 people to a wedding I didn't know was happening. She made it public when she let me believe I was marrying someone who doesn't exist." Dr. Patricia Merton found herself crying, not just for her daughter but for this young man whose devotion had been weaponized against him. "The engagement ring," Edmund continued, pulling the small diamond from his pocket. "I want you to know what this cost me. Not just money, 4 months of overtime pay, but the arthritis in my hands from extra shifts, the friendship I lost because I couldn't afford my friend's bachelor party, the exhaustion that made me fall asleep driving home 3 times." He set the ring on a nearby table, its modest sparkle looking pathetic next to the crystal and gold surrounding it. "That ring represents 4 months of my life. Real sacrifice. Real love." His voice broke slightly. "While you were playing dress-up in poverty, I was living it for both of us." The silence that followed was complete, heavy with the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. In the days following the ballroom confrontation, Both Edmund and Arya were forced to confront truths they'd been avoiding. Edmund returned to work, but his co-workers noticed the change immediately. The eager optimism that had driven him through years of double shifts was gone, replaced by something harder and more cautious. "You're different," his supervisor, Mrs. Harper, observed during his lunch break. "Not just sad. Different." Edmund considered her words carefully. "I found out that someone I trusted completely had been lying to me about everything. Not small lies, fundamental deceptions about who they were." Meanwhile, Arya sat in her penthouse, surrounded by the luxury that had never felt more hollow. Her parents had returned to their own lives, disappointed but not surprised by how the situation had resolved. The wedding guest had dispersed, but the story of the broke bride millionaire was already spreading through their social circles. It was Mabel who forced Arya to confront the most uncomfortable question: do you actually miss Edmund, or do you just miss having someone who loved your performance unconditionally? The question haunted Arya because she wasn't sure she knew the answer. She'd been performing for so long that distinguishing between authentic emotion and theatrical response had become impossible. "I think," Arya said slowly, "I fell in love with how he loved me, but I never gave him the chance to love who I actually am." Mabel nodded. "And now you'll never know if he could have." That same evening, Edmund made a decision that surprised everyone. He took the money he'd saved for their honeymoon and enrolled in night classes to finish his degree. If the last 3 years had taught him anything, it was that he couldn't build a life based on someone else's needs and expectations. "I spent 3 years trying to be worthy of someone who was never real," he told Nicholas. "Maybe it's time I figured out who I am when I'm not trying to save someone else." The parallel journeys of self-discovery had begun, but they were traveling in opposite directions, away from each other and toward the people they might have been if deception hadn't poisoned their foundation. 6 months later, Edmund stood in the coffee shop where he and Arya had had their first date, waiting for her. She'd asked to meet, and despite everything, he'd agreed. Closure, he told himself, though the word felt insufficient for the complexity of what lay between them. When Arya arrived, she looked different, less polished, more authentic somehow. She wore simple clothes and no makeup, as if she was trying to strip away the artifice that had defined their relationship. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting across from him at the same table where they'd laughed over shared stories 3.5 years ago. "You said you had something important to tell me." Arya nodded, pulling out a thick folder. "I've been in therapy. A lot of therapy. And I've made some decisions." She slid the folder across the table. "I'm dissolving the trust fund. All of it. The money is going to establish a foundation for working families, rent assistance, education grants, emergency funds." Edmund looked at the legal documents without touching them. That's a lot of money to give away." $8 million, Arya confirmed. "I kept enough to live modestly, but the rest needs to go to people who actually need it. People like you were." She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "I know this doesn't change anything between us. I know I destroyed something that can't be rebuilt. But I needed you to know that I understand now what my deception cost. Not just you, but me." Edmund studied her face, looking for traces of the performance he'd fallen in love with. Instead, he saw something he'd never seen before: genuine remorse mixed with hard-won self-awareness. "I learned something too," he said quietly. "I learned that I was so busy trying to rescue you that I never asked myself what I wanted from life. In a weird way, your lies forced me to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to save someone else." They sat in silence for a moment, two people who had loved deeply and lost completely. "I hope," Arya said finally, "that someday you find someone who deserves the way you love people. Someone who won't waste it on lies." Edmund nodded. "And I hope you find someone who can love who you really are. Not the performance, not the money, just you." As they stood to leave, going their separate ways for the final time, both understood that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, but not too deep to learn from. The love they'd shared had been real, even if it was built on fiction, and that contradiction would shape how they loved others for the rest of their lives. Outside the coffee shop, Edmund watched Arya disappear into the crowd, carrying with her the end of one story and the beginning of whatever came next. Thanks for watching. Your support means more to us than words can express. We're so thankful to have you here. Tell us in the comment section what you think about this story.